All right. I believe we are live now. So I kind of want to start with a bit of a philosophical question, I guess, somewhat, which is these last 2 months or month and a half of Russell Wilson trade talk or whatever. I think everybody here, all three of us probably never really thought that it was like ever going to happen. Not this year. There were no circumstances for that. But, at the end of the day, whether it happened or it didn't happen, maybe our lives weren't completely harmed by all of the useless news. I'm curious, do you feel like in a world where it's kind of just fun to have things to discuss, Seattle has had plenty to discuss over the last 6 weeks? Jacson, I'll start with you. Like, what have you made of all of this Russell Wilson trade talk?
It's really annoying because I don't think that there is a move to be made that helps Seattle. And when you're the guy with Russell Wilson, there's no need to make a move. And look, I buy in that he is unhappy. He is in full legacy mode. He's not pretending not to be. He cares more about his legacy than the success of the Seahawks specifically, which is okay. He has cared about the success of the Seahawks specifically for 10 years and has had a lot of it. But he fancies himself on Tom Brady's level as far as potential. And he is determined to be on a team that's going to help him start racking up Super Bowls. And I think we've seen a lot of regular season wins the last 4 or 5 years. But even last year, when they won 12 games, won the division, at no point did it seem like they were on the level of the Packers, the Bucks, the Saints, the Chiefs, the Bills. Those were all teams that just looked better. And we saw it when the playoffs rolled around. Seattle was just ill-equipped to compete with the best teams in the league, and I think Russ understands that. So, barring Deshaun Jackson or the number one pick with a bunch of extras, Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence plus coming back, there was just no way this was going to work. And neither of those trades were going to work straight up. There needed to be a third team involved. So I really do believe that John Schneider was taking calls and listening. But we saw today the Bears offered 2 starters, 3 first-rounders, and a third. And a lot of people are like, oh, my gosh, what a haul. But, I mean, this team is not built to start over at quarterback. You got 1 or 2 years left of probably your second to best players in Bobby Wagner and Dwayne Brown left. You can't start over at quarterback right now.
Can I just say that is like, and I know that I think that you alluded to this on Twitter also. Can I just say how not interesting 3 first-round picks from the Bears is? Like, that is one of the least interesting things I've ever heard in my life, especially for Russell Wilson.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like people are like, oh, 3 first-rounders. But you put Russell Wilson on that team, you're just going to keep drafting between 24 and 30, same as you always do. And if we still had our first-round picks this year, next year, maybe a case could be made that you could package those to move up and grab a quarterback. But we don't have those guys. I mean, the Jamal Adams trade basically disqualifies a Russell Wilson trade this year. And Russ isn't going to go. I mean, the only way that you even consider this with Seattle is if those 2 starters are Khalil Mack and Allen Robinson, which they definitely weren't. And even if they were, there's no way Russ is going to agree to a trade to a team that just lost its 2 best players and doesn't have any draft picks coming up.
Mookie, I mean, you were able to follow the news every day very closely with Russell Wilson. How did you even choose what to report and like what not to report?
It was pretty easy for me. Some of the obvious junk, like I know that ESPN, certainly their talk shows, made a meal out of that whole, the season ticket holder letters that didn't include Russell Wilson in the name. I thought, how gullible are you people? Wasn't it just like a month ago that Dak Prescott was left out of the hype video for Dallas, and then he ends up getting this mega contract extension? So it was a nothing story. Now, things like what The Athletic reported with Jenks and Michael Shandugar and I think Mike Sando, like that's genuine, seemingly real stuff. And I would assume that's very legitimate reporting from 3 highly respected journalists. And, that stuff is worth talking about because, there's a very good chance that Russell Wilson is not that happy with the way the team has just not been able to make a deep run at a Super Bowl since 2014. There's probably some other stuff that he is displeased with behind the scenes, more than has been let on in his public interviews. But I admit there was like a brief wobble as far as my confidence that the Seahawks would, they wouldn't do the unthinkable and actually trade the Russell Wilson. Like went from like 99% they're not going to trade Russ to as recently as last week about 90%. But like if they were going to do that, then they would have had to blow up the whole roster because trading Russell Wilson. Go on.
What did you make of this meeting between Ryan Pace and John Schneider?
Oh yeah, that's standard stuff. I guess they were there for Trey Lance for Trey Lance's pro day, and like that's also not a story as far as I'm concerned because we've seen Schneider go to Patrick Mahomes' pro day, Josh Allen. So this is a thing that he does quite regularly. And when he went to Mahomes and Allen's pro days, I don't think Wilson had signed his contract extension yet. So it is absolutely logical to try and scout a potential quarterback if you don't get a deal done with your current quarterback. But I think that Chicago's offer is it's not interesting. And as Jacson said, the Bears, they're not an interesting team. Let's be honest. They are thoroughly mediocre.
I mean, Russell Wilson on the Bears right now, just putting him on the Bears, is that better? That's not better than the Seahawks, right? I mean, going to even if they didn't have to give anybody up, that's not better than the Seahawks. He'd be in a worse position. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a particularly talented team. And Allen Robinson, I don't think has even signed his franchise tag yet. So it's possible they may have to move him anyway. They don't have great receivers outside of Robinson. And obviously their quarterback situation has never been good. Their offensive line has been scarcely impressive. And I can't imagine Russell Wilson will want to go to Chicago and be reunited with Jermaine Ifedi, whom Chicago did re-sign. So
I think I feel like we would be remiss to just start speculating about Russ. That's my fault because we would just be feeding into this thing that doesn't even exist. The fact that Russell Wilson of going to really any team. I mean, just putting out his list of 4 teams, there weren't really teams on the list that seemed like viable options. I mean, for a guy that played 3 years at North Carolina State, he didn't put the Panthers on the list. And the Carolina Panthers are the most desperate, the only team more desperate than the Bears right now. And he didn't put the Panthers on the list. So there was no chance that Russell Wilson wanted an actual trade to happen. Jacson, you talked about Russell Wilson and his legacy. I mean, like, where do you think his mindset is at right now? Do you think there is something going on this offseason that's going to appease Russell Wilson in Seattle or Seattle with Russell Wilson?
Well, in just the last couple of hours, Seattle has managed to acquire Gerald Everett and Gabe Jacson. And I do think those are moves that should make him happier. Look, there's a sentiment within most of us that says, a player shouldn't be bigger than the team. But if the goal is to win, then some players just are bigger. They just need to be appeased. And Russell Wilson's there, and he knows it, and so he's flexing on it. And, it's such an interesting situation this team finds themselves in because they had the best roster in the NFL for 4 straight years, 2012 to 2015. They had one of the best 4-year runs from a pure talent standpoint of any team in my lifetime. And, they were only able to get 1 Super Bowl, but it's still 1 Super Bowl. And ever since then, they built that team with some really shrewd drafting, some really, really smart free agency signings. And then they went full win now mode. They moved multiple firsts to get Percy Harvin. They moved a lot of picks to get Jimmy Graham. They've really gone for these guys, Jamal Adams now. And so there is nothing about this team that is really set up for a true win forever standpoint. They realize they got Russ. They've got the most valuable asset in American sports, which is a franchise quarterback in his prime. And I think that they have really tried to put a championship caliber team around them. It's just harder to do than it is to talk about. And you can't afford to miss. And they've had a lot of missteps. They've had some bad drafts. They've spent money on Luke Joeckel and Eddie Lacy and Greg Olson and Kerry Williams and guys that don't get you closer to a championship. So, I think for Russ, at some point, he's seeing a team that hasn't really been a legitimate Super Bowl contender in half a decade, and he's wondering if that's going to change.
Mookie, with regards to Seattle, like adding players and it is interesting because the Seahawks are consistently like going for it each year. And if I were to think of another team in the entire NFL that is like clearly going for it, maybe the LA Rams this year after trading everything for Matthew Stafford, and they don't have any first round picks again for a few more years. And then you've got the Arizona Cardinals, who have been active in signing JJ Watt. They're going old players, JJ Watt, AJ Green, Rodney Hudson, but these are better players. And then you've got the 49ers, who might have the most talented non-quarterback roster in the division, and they might go get Deshaun Watson for all we know.
Oh my God.
NFC
Don't put that
West,
evil on me, Ken.
Hey, listen. Let me interject just really quickly to say, if the 49ers get Deshaun Watson, then Seattle should strongly consider burning it down, getting everything you can for Russell Wilson, and rebuilding from the ground up, because you're not winning shit the next 3-4 years.
You're not. It's a fair argument. I mean, if the 49ers got Deshaun Watson, because the Matthew Stafford we know is a very good quarterback, and we know that Kyler Murray has a lot of great potential. And if you added it on top of that, Deshaun Watson, and started really considering how much more valuable Seattle's quarterback is compared to the other three teams, it is an interesting question. Mookie, I mean, how much does the rest of the NFC West sort of measure out the go for it mentality for the Seahawks this year, and the amount of optimism that maybe Russell Wilson just doesn't feel that optimistic anymore?
Well, I'm sure that Russell Wilson would have loved to have been in the AFC East for 20 years, because those other three teams had every opportunity to try and get after New England, and they hardly put up competitive teams up until last season when Brady had already left. But for Seattle, like, this division used to be the butt of jokes prior to Pete Carroll really taking full control of the team, because of course it was still a joke in 2010, but from really 2011 onward, it has been clearly the best division in football. I mean, San Francisco's gone to 2 Super Bowls, Seattle's gone to 2 Super Bowls and won one of them. The Rams have been to a Super Bowl, and the Cardinals made an NFC championship in 2015, and now they have a franchise quarterback. The Rams have what they figure to be their franchise quarterback for the next few years. This is clearly another win now move from them, and let's face it, the Rams do a lot of win now move decisions over the last several seasons. But and the Niners, as I think Jacson said, they've got a super talented roster, such that they even finished 6-10 last year. That's an incredible achievement with how many people they lost, and they still had some pretty good dudes in reserve. So to me, the Seahawks, one of their problems is the drafting just hasn't been as good. And I hate to use the whole cliche that the draft is a crapshoot, but from 2010 to 2012, there is some luck involved in there. Like, there's obviously scouting matters and everything else, and coaching and development, but that 2010 to 2012 period, that's simply not repeatable. And I hope that Seattle isn't trying to repeat it, because if they are, then they're barking up the wrong tree, because the 2010 draft was a rebuild. Like, they had to rebuild a talent poor roster. Seattle has talent on this roster. The problem is it is objectively not remotely close to being at the level of even the 2015 team. So the bad signings, the bad draft picks, or just the underwhelming draft picks have been an issue for the Seahawks. And it's not necessarily about, building around Russell Wilson, because that implies building an offense around Russell Wilson. You don't build a defense around a quarterback. But building the team as a whole has been quite difficult. We know that there have been issues with developing a consistent pass rush since everybody left. The secondary is very much a question mark, especially at both corner positions. And even the Jamal Adams trade, that's a direct result of all the failures that Seattle has had either signing or drafting players. And they had to just give in and, send 2 first-round picks and a third-rounder to the Jets just to get Jamal. And even the Quandre Diggs trade, which is a much smaller trade, but that is in direct response to the fact that, Tedrick Thompson wasn't cutting it and Lano Hill wasn't cutting it. So they had to go completely remake that, have McDougal and Diggs starts, and then they jettison McDougal to get Adams. So Seattle just doesn't have a lot of draft capital. They have made some moves. They made some moves on Wednesday. They're certainly encouraging. That's signing Gerald Everett and trading for Gabe Jacson. But I think Seahawks fans have gotten too really obsessed with the offensive line. And to me, I don't think we should confuse no investment with bad investment. Those aren't the same thing. And Seattle's had a lot of bad investments. Luke Joeckel's a bad investment. Jamarcus Webb is a bad investment. But Jari Evans was here, and he was brought here for cheap, and they cut him. and he went back to New Orleans and had a terrific year. They have drafted Damian Lewis, and Damian Lewis is showing quite a bit of promise at right guard. They drafted Ethan Posick in the second round, and they drafted Justin Britt preceding him in the second round as well, and they've been longtime starters. But Jermaine Ifedi didn't really work out all that well. James Carpenter, mixed bag, and he never really consistently stayed healthy. Like Russell Okung.
I feel like a lot of these players did live up to or even exceed their actual draft value. I definitely think like the hardest thing to do when you win is to get back to that level when you don't have access to top 20 picks. When you're stuck in that mode of like the Seattle Supersonics, or for the years where the Seattle Supersonics kept being a good regular season team and then drafting in the 20s, but never winning the finals and never getting those necessary players in the top 8 of a draft or whatever it is. And so it seems like Seattle, it's just like the bar is so people want. This is the thing too, but it goes back to what I was saying about why I do not care about. You could say, 16 first-round picks from the Bears. I just don't care. Does not do anything for me. Okay, if we haven't noticed, people probably imagine saying to somebody a year ago, "You'll get something in a year." It's like, you know what? The world's different now. I don't even want it. It's so. Whatever is going to happen in 3 years with a first round pick, it's just not that interesting. And that's because people think that people hear the most simplistic way to evaluate a trade, I think, in the NFL, especially one with draft picks, is to say, first round pick. It's a first round pick. It's a second round pick. Well, can we all agree that there's something different about a 33rd overall pick and a 62nd overall pick? Those are different picks. Those are different.
I'm so glad that you said that. And the thing is all first rounders are not created equal. Every year there's 12 to maybe 18 guys that are true first round talents. And if you're drafting after those guys are taken, you're giving first round contracts to second round players. Drafting in the end of the first is the worst spot to be. And I actually commend Seattle for trading out of most of those picks, because the drop off most years is pretty severe in terms of guys that can't miss or projected to be can't miss. After that, you're guessing, and first round contracts are bigger and they carry an extra year. And if you're drafting second round talent at 26, I'd rather be picking at 36. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just looking at, there's been so much focus on, my camera's all funky now, but there's been so much focus on, like, say, Jamal Adams, 2 first round picks for Jamal Adams, 2 first round picks for Jamal Adams, for a safety. Easy trade. I agree. and but really we're talking about picks 23 and whatever for Jamal Adams, for a great safety. You're not going to find a Jamal Adams. That's why Jamal Adams wasn't just the 6th overall pick. But if you go back to all the draft grades when he was drafted, it was like, got him at 6. That's a steal. Should have gone top 3. That's how talented he is. But only 4 years later, people are like, yeah, I wouldn't give up picks 23 and 30 for him, though. And you look around and say, nobody criticized the Laramie Tunsil trade. The Houston Texans gave up 2 firsts and a second, and the first is number 3, and the second is number 35. So nobody's criticizing as much like a Laramie Tunsil trade. And I think that to always lump in first round pick, it's like, it's got to be classified late first round pick, mid first round pick, early first round pick. If somebody's going, Seattle wants 3 first round picks, it's like, maybe they don't only want 2 first round picks. If one of those teams is the Jets and they're giving up pick number 2, then the Seahawks can go, great, well, now we've got another Wilson and we'll build it around that guy instead. But without it, it's nonsense to me.
Yeah, I don't want 4 of the Chiefs' first round picks for the best player to ever be in Seattle.
Yeah.
I think fans are, especially this crop of fans, we're a little bit too obsessed with draft assets. And this applies to just about every sport, especially NBA fans. Like Oklahoma City Thunder have got enough draft picks that will be Social Security eligible, and they'll still have some team's first round pick. Like, they've traded that far into the future. But these draft picks are only as valuable as the people selecting them. So, like, you can have all the first round picks in the world that you want. But if you've got like a Matt Millen like GM with those first round picks, you're wasting your time. Now, if you want to criticize the Adams trade, which I think can be fair, is that Seattle typically uses their first round picks to trade down and amass other picks. So by not having a first round pick, they're not able to turn one pick into three, and turn those 3 picks into 5 picks, et cetera, et cetera. But for what Seattle felt they needed to do, which is to get a top flight talent, you're willing to give up a couple of picks in the 20s to get somebody that you've been unable to get, in the NFL draft. So, the draft assets thing, I think we have overblown. Maybe it's a little bit too much of wanting to be fantasy GM. But yeah.
Well, I think that, I've had this theory. I don't know who I've shared it with before, but I think that's interesting is that if you take this analytics movement in the NFL over the last 10 years or so, it lines up really well for me with the fact that Seattle is kind of a hub for analytics because of Fangraphs, Dave Cameron. A lot of people were following Lookout Landing. They started to get this, that they like to get into the Fangraphs, the analytics. And then what happened, is that as the years went on, it turned out that the Seattle Mariners were the worst team in American sports. And so Mariners fans stopped watching the Mariners and started following the best team in the NFL, which was the Pete Carroll Seahawks. And they started going, great, I'll just follow this. It's exactly like it's just a sport. It's just a team sport. So I can use Moneyball. I can use analytics. I can use it just the same. And I just disagree. Baseball and football are very different sports. And I just don't think that you can apply all that sports have to exist in their own areas, their own spaces. And I wouldn't apply running a football team like I would apply running a baseball team. I know that, Jacson, you're a fan of multiple sports. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you said that because it is so true. To kind of keep that idea going, you look at the NBA, analytics are great when you're trying to find your 5th, 6th, and 7th best players. But if you have LeBron James that covers a multitude of sins, one player can be worth 20 or 30 wins out of 80 games. It's just not the case in the NFL outside of elite quarterbacks. So when we're talking about trading Russell Wilson, we were talking about I don't know what the draft pick compensation is for a Hall of Fame quarterback in his prime.
Yeah.
I don't know that it exists. I mean, if some team came and offered me their entire trade or their entire draft for Russell Wilson, I would say no. It might take 2 trades, but then I'm not using all 14 of those picks on my roster anyway. So
you know what it needs, Jacson? You know what I think it needs? Tell me to me, the reason that these trades don't happen in the NFL is because teams aren't willing to give up the actual asset that people want, which is if you're making a trade with the Jets for Russell Wilson, just using the Jets as an example, you got to put Quinnen Williams on the table. If you're making a talk with the Miami Dolphins, you got to put not Tua, but you got to put one of their elite players on a rookie contract. You got to have a first round pick that was already played in the NFL. To me, that's the first thing I would want.
You know what gets lost in baseball analytics discussion is it's a soft cap. You can spend as much fucking money as you want in baseball. Mm-hmm. That's why the same teams are good every freaking year because you can just outspend if you want. And it's great to be the Twins or the A's and take a team that has no business competing and win 91 games and maybe a playoff series. That's awesome. But you know what? The Yankees are just going to stomp you because they're going to go get the 4 best free agents every year. In football, you just don't have the option to do that. It's a hard cap league. It is a totally different game entirely. So, it's people they have to understand the constraints. And I think the most frustrating thing for me with all the Russell discourse is this idea of, just get everything that you can for him. And it's it took 40 years to get Russell Wilson. It'll take 40 years to get the next Russell Wilson. Once you have him, you just fucking hang on to him.
Yeah. And people are getting really antsy because of the Tom Brady thing. I think when you see a quarterback choose a team, get a championship, people start to buy into the mythology that that happened, rather than looking at it from the point of view that, there's a lot of luck and fortune and things that go into it that help the Bucks become the best team by the end of the season. And Seattle, by the way, not set up as well as the Bucks were last year.
Right.
So it's going to be, if we're putting it to the NFC West, the ranking right now of the 4 teams, how do you guys rank the 4 teams as of today? And what do the Seahawks need to do from now until week 1 to make you more optimistic about their chances of climbing up that ladder? Mookie, starting with you.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, if the Niners don't get Deshaun Watson and decide they're going to stick with Garoppolo and maybe have Mitchell Trubisky be his backup, the Niners are the most talented team except quarterback. And for that reason alone, I don't think they're the best team in the NFC West, because Garoppolo is just going to cost you too many games. And probably any backup quarterback to him is also going to do the same thing. So I think the Rams are the best team in the NFC West, because even though I don't think Stafford is a top 5 quarterback, he's been a good quarterback for most of his career and certainly better than Jared Goff. And even though defense is not a guarantee to carry from year to year at such an elite level, the Rams have so much defensive talent.
So good. They're so good.
They're so good. So, and they kept Darius Williams as a restricted free agent. I think the only notable people they've lost are Brockers and John Johnson. So there might still be some guys that they end up losing in free agency, or if the Rams decide to make any trades. But, you got Jalen Ramsey. You have a franchise cornerback, if there is such a thing, but you have your lockdown cornerback, and you have Aaron Donald, one of the greatest defensive players I think we've ever seen. So the Rams first. I still think Seattle second. Just the quarterback advantage is significant. San Francisco third. And then Arizona is fourth, but it's not like, they're fourth, but they're still a quite good team, or a team with promise. I mean, they were 8-8 last year. They collapsed from 6-3. They didn't beat really anybody of consequence apart from Seattle. But they have Kyler Murray. They've got DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe the Texans are interested in giving them more players. But still, Arizona has got some notable guys on both sides of the ball, whether Murray, Hopkins on offense, or Budda Baker and not Hassan Reddick because he left, but Chandler Jones on defense, and then you add in J.J. Watt. They can be a competitive team. So for Seattle, I think what they need to do is they really got to get a pass rusher to replace Dunlap, or bring Dunlap back. I mean, Dunlap didn't get signed as of this podcast recording, but if they can bring back Dunlap, that would be ideal. I mean, I'm glad that they kept Poona Ford. They can still work to build on that pass rush, and who knows, maybe Darrell Taylor can show something in what is effectively his rookie year, since he didn't play last season. I still think they need work on the outside. I think Akello Witherspoon is going to be more of a depth, always compete sort of deal. He shouldn't automatically earn a starting position. DJ Reed, I think, has been a revelation, but the offensive side of the ball actually worries me more than defense. And that's kind of weird to say, given how awful the defense was. Like, the defense at its worst was way worse than the offense was at its worst in the second half of the season. But on offense, the offensive line, Gabe Jackson's a start. There's still a question mark at center. There's still a question mark with Dwayne Brown's backup, because Dwayne Brown's up there in age. If he gets injured, we don't need Jamarco Jones 2.0. Like, we don't need that redux. We've seen it. We don't need to see it again. Running back, I know this will irritate people, but running back's still a question mark. And if Rashad Penny just can't get going, and he's not a suitable replacement for Chris Carson, assuming they don't re-sign Carson, then I don't know how well this offense is going to function if there is basically everything reliant on Russell.
If you boil it down to one thing that the Seahawks need to do between now and week 1, what is it? Just one thing.
If I could acquire more talent, like whether it's through the draft or
they're going to draft. I think they're going to draft somebody. I would be surprised if they didn't make a draft. Jackson, what's your ranking for the NFC West, and what's one thing you would do to help the Seahawks move up?
Yeah, so I think this question has 2 parts, because quarterback is so important, and I think the NFC West, top to bottom, has the most talented rosters of any division in the NFL. And it's reflected in the Vegas odds. I that's always a really good barometer for me for power rankings. I don't give a shit what a radio host or TV host, how they rank teams. Vegas is dialed, and right now they've got the NFC West as a total crapshoot. Most divisions, you've got one favorite where you got to spend more money to win your initial buy-in, to for them to win. And then you've got 2 or 3 long shots. Right now, everyone is pretty close as far as odds to win the division in the NFC West. So I think Seattle's roster, apart from quarterback, is third, barely better than the Cardinals. With quarterback, I think they're, assuming there's so many caveats. Assuming Deshaun Watson doesn't come to San Francisco, I think Seattle has the best quarterback in the division. And they might still have the best quarterback in the division if Deshaun Watson comes here. But listen, 49ers were 5 minutes away from beating the Kansas City Chiefs, a fully healthy Kansas City Chiefs team, which is the best roster in the NFL, with Jimmy Garoppolo. And Jimmy Garoppolo is probably somewhere in the 20th to 25th best quarterback in the NFL. You replace that with top 5 quarterback, it's curtains. So the Rams have the roster. The Niners are right there. And then there's a big drop-off to Seattle and Arizona. And Russell Wilson has covered a multitude of sins for a long time. And that margin for error is just gone now. So for them, look, Seattle could, with this roster and with Russell Wilson, they could win the division again. But looking at the roster as it stands right now, I don't see a Super Bowl contender. Whereas I do see that with San Francisco. I do see that with the Rams. And the Cardinals are making moves around a young quarterback on a rookie contract where they've got the flexibility to really go for it. So I could see Seattle anywhere from 1st to 4th in that division, which is a lame answer. But I definitely see them as like 3rd best as far as Super Bowl odds go. So what do they need to do between now and then? They gotta hit on that 2nd round draft pick straight up. That guy's got to be a stud, and he's got to contribute. And then you just need these other guys. You need all these defensive line guys to hit their potential. LJ Collier showed a lot of promise last year. If he continues to progress, great. I like Rasheem Green. Hopefully Darrell Taylor who just reminds me the hell of Frank Clark. If you're adding a young Frank Clark on this team, yeah, okay, great. I think you got the best linebacking core in the NFL. I think the secondary is still good. I love the Alexander signing. Jamal Adams, I think, is worth everything they spent for him, and hopefully they can extend him. And I don't see how you make that trade without a plan to extend him. So what they've got to do, I don't know that there's an obvious move for them to all of a sudden become a top 4 team in the NFL. But what I do see is a top 8 team in the NFL, a top 10 team in the NFL that is just clinging to the fringe of Super Bowl relevance right now.
How often do you think the 10th best team wins the Super Bowl? Once a decade? Not that I'm not like, but I'm curious, how often do you think that a team like Seattle wins the Super Bowl? Because again, like I said, I think the Bucks were clearly more talented. It just took them a while to get going during the season. But it's still pretty low odds for Seattle at this point, would you say?
Never.
Never. The 10th best team never. Yeah, you might be right. The Giants at 9-7, but then they are a different
I think the last
team.
time. Yeah. I think I can think of 3 examples of a team that was probably around the 10th best team in the NFL has won the Super Bowl. The Giants those 2 years, and the Steelers the year that they beat the Seahawks as a 6th seed in the Super Bowl. Those are the only times in my lifetime that the 10th best team in the NFL has won a Super Bowl. So yeah. All right, I've been alive a little less than 40 years. Okay, maybe once every dozen years, but we haven't seen it in the last 15 years. And last year was the first year that a team without a first-round bye won a Super Bowl in like 12 years. You have to get a first-round bye now. And now only 2 teams get that. I just think Seattle, I think there's a big gap there. And they've been trying to Band-Aid that for a number of years by trading assets for one big player. And I've generally been in favor of those moves, but you have to hit on your remaining draft picks, and they haven't done it.
Let me ask you guys one quick question here, because I'm trying to figure out, I think for the 49ers to trade for Deshaun Watson, if they want to do that, not that I'm trying to give out any secrets here, But I'm thinking it's hard for me to see San Francisco doing it again without offering Houston a pick that allows them to draft one of the top 4 quarterbacks, which we know those guys are going to go fast. So what if the 49ers trade pick 12 and their 2023 first round pick to the Detroit Lions, because we know that the Lions are all about capital right now. They're not about anything else. So they move up to number 7. Then the 49ers pick number 7, their 2022 first round pick, and Javon Kinlaw, and their 2021 second round pick for Deshaun Watson. If you were the Texans, Jackson, would you accept pick 7, a second round pick, next year's first round pick, and Javon Kinlaw for Deshaun Watson?
I will preface my answer by saying that is the one team that I least associate my philosophy with. And I think we probably all agree with that. They seem to be just an abject disaster right now. But if I were plopped down in Nick Casterly's role and I'm the GM of the Texans, I love that trade. That's the first Deshaun Watson mock trade I've heard that I'm on board with. And here's the thing. A lot of people are equating Russell Wilson's situation with Deshaun Watson's, and they aren't even in the same stratosphere. Deshaun Watson has come out and said, I am not playing for the Texans again, and I don't blame him. That dude is entering his prime. He has sky-high potential. He has Patrick Mahomes potential, and he's on a team where he'd be lucky to win 7 games. So I don't blame him. Russell Wilson has said like 3 or 4 times in the last 6 weeks that he would love to stay in Seattle and that he hopes it works out. And he would like to see the team, alter its approach to the offensive line. And when you're talking about actual source material and not the, Colin Cowherd puts out a mock trade and then all the blogs pick up, oh my gosh, it's rumored that Russell Wilson could go to the Jets, and then here's an article from the New York Post that pulls a quote from the day before the Seahawks played the Jets back in December, where Pete Carroll said one moderately nice thing about Sam Darnold. Now he loves Sam Darnold, and he's interested in him. Like, get out of here. So, if I'm the Texans, I would do that trade in a heartbeat because I don't have the leverage that the Seahawks have with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson hasn't hinted at holding out. He's frustrated with how the roster is constructed, and he should be. So, the Texans have to get what they can for Deshaun Watson, and that would be a great haul. And if I'm the Niners, I'm making that trade, and if I'm the Lions, I'm making that trade. I'm pissed off that you put that out there because all 3 teams say yes.
I think that it makes sense. If the 49ers, because people are like, you got to give up 4 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson. Well, the 49ers would be giving up Javon Kinlaw and the 6th overall pick and their next first-round pick. It's all stuff that they would be willing to give up to get Deshaun Watson, because if you put Deshaun Watson, Brandon Ayuk.
You make that trade, you got a legitimate shot at 3 Super Bowls in the next 5 years. You kidding me? Kyle Shanahan coaching Deshaun Watson with that defense, and he's throwing to Kittle and Debo and fucking Brandon Ayuk with those running backs. Get out of here, man. They could win 15 games a year.
I do think the 49ers, there's always a chance that with Jimmy Garoppolo, they'll be contenders because they just were. But he's very bad at being healthy, obviously. And at the end of the day, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have had 3 out of 4 bad seasons. So at the end of the day, 49ers always on that edge. And I would also say, it's time for them. It might be time for them to just go for it. And we know that John Lynch likes playing this GM game. I don't know. I do think that the Seahawks have a ways to go to between. The thing is that a lot of their trades and their big moves do come after the draft. They'll wait until August or September, like with Sheldon Richardson or Jadeveon Clowney. Like a lot of these trades, Dwayne Brown will come later on potentially.
Dunlap.
Dunlap, and that one, what a great value for them to get even something out of Carlos Dunlap for such a 7th round pick and BJ Finney or whatever. So I guess for me, it's just a matter of like, does this team just seem boring now, even though that they seem competitive if they keep bringing back the same thing? Like, to me, there's always, I was telling Mookie before we got started here, the 2 pitches that I have, because I think the Seahawks need to try something dangerous. You've just got to try something dangerous. You got to try something risky. You're not there, and you got to be willing to be called an idiot. And I just think that in this era, no innovator is doing anything interesting without taking a risk of looking stupid. So you just got to do it. And so if I'm the Seahawks, I'm putting out Bobby Wagner on the trade block. I'm putting Tyler Lockett on the trade block. I'm seeing if I can free up $10 to $15 million and get back a 1st or a 2nd round pick. I think Bobby Wagner is worth a late 1st round pick. I think that they are set up to be fine without him, because they did trade for Jamal Adams, because they did draft Jordan Brooks. I think they have a possibility to go to the Cleveland Browns and say, hey, look, Bobby, we're putting you in a chance to win a Super Bowl. We think you have a chance to win a Super Bowl with the Browns. The Browns are going, we want a stud on our defense. We want a guy like Bobby Wagner. We know that we're trying to go for it right now, and the 22nd overall pick or whatever it is isn't going to do it for the Cleveland Browns. It never has. So I'm thinking maybe the Seahawks can get back in the 1st round, something like that. Mookie, just on the thoughts of like taking a chance, maybe trading one of their better players to get the cap space to make a move or to get a draft pick back. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think if there's going to be a legitimate criticism of Schneider and Carroll, is that they don't have enough talents on this team that's worth trading for that would net them a high draft pick. So Lockett and, well, realistic trades, like, no, they're not trading DK Metcalf, for example. There'd be
fuck
riots.
off.
Yeah,
Fuck off.
There would be riots, right outside Pike Place and everywhere else in downtown the moment that happens. But Lockett's, he's been injured each of the last 2 seasons, and when that's happened, the Seahawks passing game has struggled quite a bit, and Lockett kind of just disappears for prolonged stretches. When he's on, he is arguably, a top 15 receiver, maybe top 10. He's got tremendous chemistry with Russell Wilson, so it would be hard to part ways with Lockett. But as I talked to Kenneth before we started the program, he's not at his top physical condition anymore. Well, he's not at his top athleticism, because ever since that broken leg, his top end speed is just gone, and he's having a hard time eluding defenders. Like he would go down on contacts or just preserve himself, which I understand, or just get out of bounds, but he hardly breaks tackles. And I feel like part of Seattle's problem is they've been losing too many hidden yards with the lack of yards after the catch and the lack of breaking broken tackles that they got. Now, in a new offensive system, like maybe this is why I would tip the scales towards trading Wagner over Lockett, is that maybe Lockett would have better opportunities to work in space with a different offensive coordinator. Whereas with Bobby Wagner, not much has changed really with Seattle's base defensive system. So with Wagner, I love him, but Jordan Brooks showed a lot of promise towards the end of his rookie season. If they lose Wright and Wagner, that would be a problem. Brooks is a stud, but I don't, if you re-sign Wright and trade Wagner and have Brooks start there, okay, that's fine. If you lose both Wright and Wagner and then have Brooks be your main guy, the problem then becomes depth, because Cody Barton in his few defensive snaps has just not been good enough. But Wagner is older. His contract is coming up, the season after this one. So I don't think Seattle would be too inclined to pay both Wright and Wagner. As great as they've been, they're going to be in the Ring of Honor here, and then Wagner's going to Canton. But trading Bobby Wagner to me at this point is not an insane idea. Even Lockett, like I've noodled that. I'm not outright said it, but if Seattle can get a Smith-Schuster or a Galladay, although Galladay's got offers from other teams, so it might not happen, they can upgrade their wide receiver talent, because I feel like Seattle, the talent deficit has been apparent at the skill positions as well. Like you watch the top teams, you look at Tampa Bay, and they can talk about Tom Brady having as much input on the team as they want, but Tampa Bay drafted Godwin and Evans before he ever got there, and they had Cameron Brate before he ever got there. So ditto, like Ali Marpet
and Levante David.
Yeah, on the defensive side of the ball, David.
I think that Yeah, I think that it's not even an insult to Tyler Lockett to say that I do think he has day 2 draft pick kind of value, because you
Yeah.
look at a lot of teams that could use a Tyler Lockett. They're not there are like an influx of talented receivers coming to the NFL, but we've seen that it's kind of hard to predict which ones are going to hit early or later, and whether they're going to hit at all. You know, the NFL teams have not done that great of a job of ordering these wide receivers that come into the NFL, because you got Hollywood Brown going ahead of AJ Brown and DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin. So it's like, to me, it's like getting something. It's going to be a good for. I can put Tyler Lockett on a talented team right now, like the Colts, and say like, well, what about your first round pick in the 20s, or not even for Tyler Lockett, a first round pick, but like maybe your second round pick or whatever. But Jacson, I know that you're very keen on elite players and Seattle historically great players. Would that be a problem talking about a Bobby Wagner deal?
I think, one thing that's really hard for us as fans and analysts to quantify is locker room impact. And because we can't quantify it, we tend to discredit it. You got to understand that there is a huge collateral that comes with trading Bobby Wagner. He is the man in that locker room. Absolutely. I mean, Russ is the most valuable asset, but that's Bobby's locker room. So you are creating a huge hole there. Now, I love Jordan Brooks. I think Jordan Brooks is Bobby Wagner 2.0. And drafting him when everyone wanted Patrick Queen, who was not nearly as good as Jordan Brooks as a rookie, despite being in a great defense, it does give you, for the first time in Wagner's career, the flexibility to move him. But again, you gotta have a clearly defined philosophy for what you're trying to do over the next 3 years. If you're trying to compete right now, you can't trade Bobby Wagner for a late first. You just can't do it. He's way more valuable over the next 2 years to the Seahawks than whoever you're drafting in that spot is. And the same thing for Tyler Lockett. If you get a first for Tyler Lockett, you think about it. But Ken, I agree with you, man. I don't know that you get a first rounder for him. And he is so much more valuable to Russell Wilson. He is so much more valuable to the Seattle Seahawks than anybody you're going to draft right there, on top of the salary savings that you're going to get. So unless that's used to go get Kenny Golladay or Juju. So it's just tough. They're in a tough spot where. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you something about your opinion on. I don't want to use the word alpha, but if we were talking about guys that are locker room leaders, that in the term of alpha, of somebody who's just the most vocal, do you think that, looking back at when Seattle was at its most successful or where they are at right now, is it possible when you add a guy like Jamal Adams, who is himself a massive vocal leader? It's what he was known for coming out of college. It's really what got him kicked out of the Jets, because they don't really sit well with ambitious, eager people who want to win. So it seems like it didn't really mesh that well. Jamal Adams' demand to be a better team. So it didn't work out well there. Is it possible at all that you could, you think it's ever possible in a group or on a team to improve by sort of eliminating one leader or taking one voice out of the equation to have more of a, I'm not even putting this on Adams or Wagner or the Seahawks, but is it possible to ever get better by sort of more clearly defining who that leader is?
Yeah. I don't get a sense that there is anything detrimental in the dynamic between Jamal Adams and Bobby Wagner. I do think that Adams and Brooks are the future leaders of that defense. And, that's been Bobby's role for a long time. So, yeah, you've got some flexibility there. But again, it all comes down to, what is your plan for the next 3 years? And if your plan is to compete for a Super Bowl, then you have to commit to Russell Wilson. I think that's one thing that's a little bit annoying to me, is that they haven't come out and said, look, Russell Wilson's our guy. And I would love to know the reasons behind that. But taking it even higher, and I don't mean to depart from the fine point of that question, I think from an ownership standpoint, you need to rank from a priority standpoint who is most important with Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, and John Schneider, because I do think we're reaching the end of the line with those three being super compatible.
Yeah.
I think we're extremely lucky to have had a decade of those guys being on the same page. Most franchises would dream of having that because those are the three most important assets to an organization, are the GM, the head coach, and the quarterback. And they've been in lockstep for most of the time. They're very clearly not in that anymore. So now you got to choose. And to me, it is lunacy to have Pete Carroll higher than third in that priority. It is lunacy to have John Schneider higher than second in that priority. So what I would love is for ownership to make clear, if not publicly, make clear to Schneider and Carroll that Russell Wilson is the most valuable asset in this organization. He's the most valuable asset in Seattle sports history. And you have to build around that. There is nothing indicating that you don't have 5 more good years from him. There's lots indicating you don't have 5 more good years from Pete Carroll. There's a strong argument to be made you don't have 5 more good years from John Schneider. But there's nothing indicating that you can't get 5 more good years from Russell Wilson. So that trickles down. And I think you have to solidify how that looks at the top before you start discussing who's most important on the defense. But narrowing it back down to your original question, I would love to see Bobby Wagner finish his career in Seattle for beyond sentimental reasons. I think he's still really, really, really good. He was the main reason that defense went from the worst in the NFL to the second best defense in the NFL over the last half of the season. That cannot be overlooked in these discussions. That defense balled out in November and December last year. They were even really good in the playoffs. Their offense played in shitty positions all game long, and they played great. So, I mean, if you can get
which is why, to your point, I just, when I say trade Bobby Wagner for a first round pick, here's what a lot of people do. This is what a lot of people do. They go, you know what I want to do? I think the Seahawks should trade Dwayne Brown for a first round pick. And they say it with a straight face, and they believe that that's something legitimate. It's not that time of life anymore. But for me, when I say I'm going to trade Bobby Wagner for a first round pick, I mean, I'm going to give a team a fucking great player for a first round pick. I'm going to give them somebody that's actually going to not make them regret giving up a first round pick, because I think Bobby Wagner, I'm looking at, when I compare him to other Hall of Fame inside linebackers, the average age or the average amount of games played, I did this earlier in the year, he's got 4 more years left of Pro Bowl quality play. I mean, he's not that old. I think that he's going to put that together. If it wasn't for the Seahawks, I was just saying, great, then the Seahawks have that player, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm only thinking that in the terms of how do the Seahawks get better right now? Because we know what the Seahawks look like with Bobby Wagner. They haven't won a playoff game. What did they won? 3 playoff games in the last 6 years. They have to try something dramatic at some point. They cannot continue to bring back the same players and the same coaches. And even if they can change out the coordinators, we've seen that has not changed anything to the degree of getting them back to the NFC Championship game, let alone the Super Bowl. So when I'm talking about trading Bobby Wagner for a first-round pick, one thing that I think is that if the Seahawks get back in the first round, this is the perfect year to do what they love to do, which is to load up on day 2 and day 3 picks, because nobody knows what the fuck is about to happen in this draft. A lot of these players haven't played in over a year. It's just going to be insane. So this is the type of year where I think Seattle needs to definitely consider how they do their Seattle thing and draft 10 guys on day 2 and day 3. But something dramatic, I think, needs to happen. So,
well, you just need to know what your future with Russell Wilson is before you make that decision.
And it's going to be hard to break up. Can you do John Schneider? I mean, at some point, Pete Carroll, we know that Pete Carroll is going to be out of the NFL before John Schneider, but does John Schneider just go and rogue and do a completely new thing? He's attached his entire 11-year career so far to whatever Pete Carroll likes to do, and he's been pretty successful doing it. People think super highly of him. He's one of the most respected GMs in the NFL. So you would think that not a lot would change even if Pete Carroll left. So you would have to think that there would have to be like a dissolution of the whole philosophy. I mean, it would have to be like a package deal almost to some degree for me to envision the Seahawks going down a different path. But there is certainly uncertainty above Pete Carroll. Obviously, we don't know who is even making those calls, right?
Yeah, it's true because we can't really speculate too much on how involved ownership is at the moment. But my thought is this is going to be short of a Super Bowl win, the last season that we see Carroll, Schneider, and Wilson all together at once. So then it becomes ownership's call to figure out if this season goes down to 2. Because let's be honest, as glowing as I am about Russell Wilson and certain Seahawks players, they're closer to the precipice of collapse than they are to being an actual contender. And that's weird to say when they just went 12-4 and won the division. But the embarrassment of that playoff defeat has me thinking that it could all tumble to an 8-9 if we have a 17-game season, an 8-9 season, no playoffs, and then suddenly, Wilson's even more disgruntled. So ownership might be compelled to say, yeah, we gave Carroll and Schneider their 5-year contract extensions, but I think it's time to do a totally different philosophical direction to preserve our franchise quarterback. Because as we've discussed already, like franchise quarterbacks, future Hall of Famers don't just leave for another team in their prime. Like Peyton Manning's is a freak of nature in that sense because we didn't know if he had anything left after that neck injury. That's a totally different story than Wilson, who has never missed a game in his career. So for Seattle, they got to figure out, are they at a philosophical difference at this sense, which is I believe that Pete Carroll, for better or worse, believes in building a great team over building a team around its franchise quarterback. I think there's a difference there. So if he's trying to recreate the magic from seasons past, which would include the pre-Russell Wilson years, he's barking up the wrong tree. It's just not going to happen. But if you're going to really invest in Wilson's future, his long-term future, because I would consider even 3 years down the line as long-term future, you might have to swallow your pride and figure out a way to do that. And this is already an encouraging start with acquiring Jacson and then signing Gerald Everett. Not like Everett's some top 10 tight end, but at least having some depth there as a reliable.
Gerald Everett is. I can't stress enough how not excited to get about Gerald Everett.
Oh my God, I am so excited about Gerald Everett.
So boring. He is. I have covered the Rams for the last 15 months, and nobody could have come up less in my mind than Gerald Everett. He does nothing.
Oh.
I mean, he's not going to be anybody's idea of this big splash signing, but at least he's depth at a position that the Seahawks badly need to fill up. But, the offense, are you going to, quote, build an offense around Russell Wilson? They already willingly went to a pass-heavy offense last season, and it had varying results. I think that there was some fool's gold at the start of the season because they played Atlanta, Dallas, New England. Those are bad defenses, or at least they were very bad to start the year. A lot of defenses struggled to start the year. Second half of the schedule, they played good defenses. They played the Rams 3 times in 9 weeks. They played Washington. The Giants closed the year as one of the better defense. Buffalo had a much better defense at the second half of the season than the first half. So whatever tinkering with the offense Pete Carroll did, I mean, some of it may just be the fact that Seattle's offense.
But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if they had been a little bit better. They are not a Super Bowl team.
That's the thing.
They are not the Kansas City Chiefs. They are not, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they were really playing beginning in December. They were not those kinds of teams. They were not the Packers. They were not the Bills. They were not the teams that got close to the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter like whether or not they played good defenses. They weren't the type of offense that plays good defenses and continues to play well. And so that's going to be the problem for any team trying to win the Super Bowl, is that you got to go through these things called playoff teams with playoff defenses. So it doesn't really matter how decent you are in the regular season if the goal is to win a Super Bowl. And maybe there's other things to shoot for every year, but that's the thing if you want to win the Super Bowl.
Well, it's an important point you make because let's be honest, these last several playoff appearances, the offense has just been so dysfunctional. Like I'm including the 2015 season, which that team ended number 1 in DVOA, I think overall, and in overall offense. So they scored 10 points against the Vikings. They were pretty fortunate to even come away with a win that day. Now the weather was terrible, but still, they were 31-0 down against Carolina the following week. You go to 2016, they had scored 13 points against a so-so Lions team, and then they pulled away in the fourth quarter. They scored 20 points against the Falcons, and like 7 of those came in garbage time. They scored, well, we don't like to bring up the Cowboys game, but they scored 22.
Oh my God.
They were stuck on 14 until the game was pretty much out of reach. 2019, they scored 17 points against the Eagles, and they're 21-3 down against the Packers. And then last year they put up 20 points against the Rams. And again, that touchdown that last touchdown pretty much came in garbage time. So Seattle's offense, for as much as we talk about the decline of the defense, or the demise of the defense from the Legion of Boom days, if there's anything that would be considered inexcusable, is the fact that way too often Seattle's offense just does not look prepared for playoff football. Like they're consistently figured out by the time they get into the postseason. And that shouldn't happen with somebody of Russell Wilson's talent. Now, some of it can be Wilson, but a lot of it can just be, the lack of talent relative to the opposition's defense. And then the rest of it would be coaching, whether it's Carroll or Bevel or Schottenheimer.
I mean, what was like, this is the thing, is that while you can easily attach everything to Russell Wilson, because as you say, Jacson, he'll be good for another 5 years. You can contend with Russell Wilson. At the end of the day, how did teams stop the landslide? How do you do Tom Brady? Because Tom Brady could have easily fallen into the same trap that Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger and Matt Ryan and Cam Newton and every other quarterback that went to the Super Bowl or won a Super Bowl, or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees, who could not get back to the Super Bowl. How do you stop that slide and pull a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady? Because that's the thing, that it doesn't matter how massively amazing you are. You could be Brett Favre and win 3 MVPs. At the end of the day, all these guys just failed to get back to the Super Bowl. So it means Russell Wilson is very capable of going 10 more years without a Super Bowl, even if he does play another 10 more years. So how do you stop the slide?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, and I'm glad we circled back to this, because what we do need to acknowledge is that Tom Brady has broken the expectation model.
100%.
For the longest time, winning a Super Bowl or getting to multiple Super Bowls was enough to mint you forever. And Tom Brady's he's just absolutely broken that. And, maybe nothing is more impressive than him just picking a team and then winning a Super Bowl with them. And he was very shrewd about the team that he picked, but let's be real. It didn't look good the first month and a half of the season. He was really struggling. But Tom Brady is the most adaptive athlete of my lifetime. And the guy lost his deep ball like 8 years ago. And so he just became, it was like when Jordan lost his explosiveness and became the most deadly mid-range player in the NBA. Like, Tom Brady is just a killer at the line of scrimmage, which brings me to the dysfunction of the Seahawks getting their fucking plays in time to actually diagnose shit at the line of scrimmage. Tom Brady's out of the huddle with 25 seconds left on the play clock every time, and he has time to work through 2 or 3 audibles if he needs to. And so it's little stuff like that. And you know what? If Russell Wilson wants to be Tom Brady, he can't be letting Pete Carroll rush in a change of play call with 8 seconds left on the play clock on 4th and 1, and now you take a delay game or you burn a timeout and you're settling for a field goal instead of going for it on 4th and goal from the 2. Like, these are the little things where the cracks in the system are starting to show. And for me, that's really frustrating. And if Russell Wilson wants to be, y'all know I'm very pro Russell Wilson in all of this, but if he wants to be Tom Brady, at some point you got to say, you know what, my headset stopped working and I called the play, and we went ahead and did it. Because when it's time to snap the ball, it doesn't fucking matter who your head coach is or who your GM is. It matters who your quarterback is. And Russell Wilson hasn't been in the position to be Tom Brady yet.
Right.
So it's just that to me is, as a Seahawks fan our whole lives, which I assume the 3 of us have been. Kenny's a trader now, but Mookie,
True.
You and I, we've been Seahawks fans our whole lives. And for the first 90%, we were happy to win more than 8 games and compete for a division title, and maybe we'll get a playoff win. What a year. But then we saw what being the best team in the NFL looks like. 2013, we'll never touch again. That was one of the best teams in NFL history. The penalty for that is that's now our standard. And Seattle has fallen really, really far from that.
Yeah, well, I should note, as a California native, Bay Area native, I grew up rooting for the Niners when I was a little kid. But I'm born in '93, so their last Super Bowl, I was like 2 years old, so I have no recollection of that whatsoever. So when I became like really invested in football on a weekly basis, and I was going to move to Seattle anyway, like 2003, 2004, I think is the year they traded for Jerry Rice, and I already had Sean Alexander as just one of my favorite players, just on last name basis. So I became hooked on the Seahawks like from 2003-ish, 2004 onwards. So essentially, I've been a fan of the Seahawks way more than I can really recall being a Niners fan. So we remember the Holmgren days, and Holmgren was on the cusp of getting fired because he couldn't win in the playoffs, and then 2005 happened, and that was a magical year. But then we saw the cracks in 2006, and then 2007 was looking decent, but we know Sean was done. And then they got bounced for the playoffs. And then 2008, Holmgren says it's his final year. Everything falls apart. So that leads you to what we've had with Carroll, and then the 1 year with Jim Moore that everybody would love to forget, but did ultimately give us Pete Carroll. Now, I'm glad you brought up the Tom Brady standard, because in the salary cap era, I think I want to, that's an important distinction to make with the salary cap era and free agency. Winning a Super Bowl is already hard in itself. Winning multiple Super Bowls, whether you have the greatest quarterback or one of the greatest or just an average quarterback, is exceptionally hard. And it's just the logistics of it, the financial situation. It's not the NBA where one player can change the entire complexion of your team like LeBron or Michael Jordan or what have you. So over the last 30 years, like Troy Aikman has won multiple Super Bowls in the salary cap era. John Elway did, and John Elway did it having lost 3 Super Bowls in the 80s and the early 90s. But they changed head coaches, changed the offensive system because he was aging. They suited his needs a bit better. They got a great offensive line, a Hall of Fame running back, a pretty good defense, and they won 2 Super Bowls. But you got that. You have Ben Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger had nothing to do with their first Super Bowl win, including scoring the fantasy touchdown. Then the second Super Bowl, that was, again, mostly defense, but he had a game-winning drive. So Big Ben and Brady and Peyton and Eli and Elway and Aikman. So that's 7 quarterbacks right there. But, a couple of them, certainly you can't say they were at the focal point. They weren't the main reason for winning multiple Super Bowls. But Aaron Rodgers, he might end his career with just 1 Super Bowl appearance. Same with Drew Brees. Would you say Peyton Manning underachieved by only winning 2 Super Bowls? Because that's what happened. He went to 4. He won 2, but the second one, he was pretty much washed up. They had a legendary defense help him win the second championship. So we have unrealistic expectations as a direct result of the Patriots dynasty.
Only, I feel like, emphasize to people that even if you have the greatest quarterback who ever lived, it's still fucking hard to win the Super Bowl.
It's hard to get to a
championship. He is probably, Peyton Manning is probably the best quarterback that's ever lived. And this brings into, I mean, we could do this for 3 hours. This brings into, discussion the difference between best and greatest. But you're right. This is something where it is just really, really hard. And on the flip side, you've got Eli Manning winning 2. You've got Nick Foles winning a Super Bowl. You got Trent Dilfer winning a Super Bowl. I mean, if everything else is perfect, it can happen. But you've got no margin for error if your quarterback's not elite.
Yep.
And Seattle does have an elite quarterback, which makes you on the short list of contenders. If you have Russell Wilson, you're a top 10 Super Bowl contender regardless. But the difference between being the 10th best team and the 4th best team is a chasmous gap. And you have to do everything else right in order to close that gap. And Seattle went from, another thing that I think has jacked up our expectations is Russell Wilson won a Super Bowl in his 2nd year. So we're all thinking, oh my God, how many more are we going to get? If Russell Wilson won his first Super Bowl last year, and you just switch around the results of the last 10 years a little bit, and Russell Wilson's his Super Bowl win is more recent, then we're feeling a lot different. But the expectations were sky high with the best defense of the last 20 years and a quarterback on a Hall of Fame track. It felt like it was going to go forever. And I look at the Saints, who have been trotting out a top 4 roster in the NFL for like 8 straight years, and they got 1 Super Bowl and a bunch of really disappointing playoff exits. It's just fucking hard to do. It's really hard to do, and I don't think Seattle's that close right now.
Yep, it's true. Well, it's fair. It's fair for fans to be upset over not winning a second Super Bowl, like they were a yard away from doing so. But I think for us, there's a right to be frustrated over not really getting close to getting back to the Super Bowl. So like reaching a conference championship game, I think that should have been a viable expectation over this 6-year drought per se. So, 2015 and 2016 divisional round exits, and they effectively got blown out in 2016, and they were blown out for a good chunk of the 2015 game too. They were blown out for like 2.5 quarters of the Packers game 2 seasons ago. So that to me is not getting all that close. So you look at other teams with franchise quarterbacks, like Phillip Rivers had his career wasted. He went to one conference championship game his entire career. You bring up Drew Brees. Sean Payton is lauded as this offensive genius, and he is. He's a great head coach. But they had 3 straight 7-9 seasons with a healthy Drew Brees putting up gangbusters numbers. So they weren't calling for Sean Payton's head then, and they eventually rebuilt that roster, had a great defense because they had a lousy defense with Brees having, Brees' godlike numbers. But it still wasn't enough, and Brees has been on the decline, and now he's going to be in the NBC booth. So a lot has to go right. So maybe Carroll had it right initially, which is we need a great team regardless of who's the quarterback. And like if you're of the opinion, I think I could put it this way. The 2013 team was so fantastic that if you had a slightly above average quarterback leading that team and not Russell Wilson, who at that point to me was already a top 10 quarterback, they could still make a deep playoff run, if not at least make the Super Bowl.
Well, that's what I think with Russell Wilson, though. I think people don't really give enough credit to the fact that when you watch Russell Wilson in 2013, that guy, he's really good. Like he's still really. I think he does different things, but I think he's always been really good. So I think that like. There is sort of the possibility that we've seen the best of Russell Wilson in his career, and he'll continue to be really good. But there was just different aspects also to the way that they could run offense. I do want to go back to what Jacson said about me being a traitor and emphasize that is 100% accurate. I am a traitor, 100% on the other side of the Rams. So go ahead and I will let that one out there. I'm just I have a general interest in the NFL. I'll just put it more that way. But, and I would talk passionately about the Jaguars, how they could win a Super Bowl.
Well, the Jaguars are practically the Seahawks at this point.
Well, this is the thing, though, because, if I were to, this is my thing. If I were to pick another team to win, I think that, I think the Chargers have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl next year than the Seahawks do. And the Chargers, are definitely have been a worse team of late. And I don't think that Justin Herbert, I like Justin Herbert a lot. And I think that he could become an MVP caliber player. But it's really hard for the Seahawks to get back to that level and build that way while paying the quarterback so much money. So that is the conflict of these times, I think.
Yeah, and young quarterbacks winning the Super Bowl, it is a blessing and a curse. Like, this is why I think it's insane how often media just projects multiple Super Bowls and multiple Super Bowl appearances, like Tom Brady level for Patrick Mahomes. Like, Mahomes, if he retired today, he'd be a borderline Hall of Fame candidate just in his 3 seasons as a starter. He's been that good. But, Russell Wilson, year 1, lose in the divisional round in heartbreaking fashion. Year 1 of Mahomes as a starter, they lost to heartbreaker in the conference championship. Year 2, they both win Super Bowls. Year 3, they both lose Super Bowls to Tom Brady. Now, Andy Reid and Pete Carroll are different.
I think the Chiefs could be. I think the Chiefs, it's not good when you get figured out. So, and I also think that the Chiefs, could be figured out right now too. So do you think like Mahomes could be on that same? This is the thing, is that like Jacson, like you were saying in the beginning, if Russell Wilson wins 2 and then 3 and comes close in 3, you think all this stuff's going to happen. Mookie, could the Chiefs kind of maybe not? Could that happen to the Chiefs?
Yeah, they could get figured out. I think some of their, a good portion of their success is the incredible talent advantage that they've historically had on offense with Reid. Like they still had a pretty good offense with Alex Smith at quarterback because they already had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and a really good offensive line. And Andy Reid, of course, being the mastermind of everything. Mahomes is just putting up video game-esque numbers, but what's going to look ugly is if that offensive line isn't as good or if there are injuries. They've been pretty fortunate that Mahomes has only missed a couple of games due to injury. And even then, Matt Moore was able to run that offense pretty effectively. Chad Henne got a couple of decent drives in. But what happens if there's a serious injury to Tyreek Hill, for example, or Travis Kelce is less than effective, or teams have figured out ways to like bracket Hill and bracket Kelce successfully? Then it's got to make Mahomes do a lot more different things as compared to just having everything look so easy. And I got to say, as much as I love Mahomes and his arm talent and the crazy things that he does, the moment that his arm talent starts to go on him or he starts to lose some of his mobility, his decline, which I hope is many, many years from now because I love watching him play, it is going to look worse than Brett Favre's decline ever did. Like, he'll be throwing interceptions for fun. So it's been great times for Kansas City, but like Buffalo is on the rise. Josh Allen has been way better than I had ever imagined.
Same.
I thought he'd be looking closer to out of the league by year 5 than MVP candidate in year 4. So the Bills, Cleveland, I never thought I'd be saying Cleveland and Buffalo as potential contenders in my lifetime. The Chargers, as you mentioned, like, they can't be cursed forever. So you've got up and coming teams in the AFC, so that it is possible that these 2 Super Bowl appearances from Mahomes, that's as good as it gets. And that's still a really good career.
That's the interesting thing that I think is overlooked a lot, which is that everybody, like, I was watching this interview, Chris Collinsworth on PFF, and him and Richard Sherman were interviewing Brandon Staley, the new head coach of the Chargers. And before the thing started, Sherman and Staley were talking about how to stop the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think what's interesting is that that's probably what most NFL coaches are thinking about right now, is how to stop the Chiefs, how to stop the Bills, how to stop the teams that were good last year. So there's kind of an advantage to being one of these teams that nobody's concerning themselves as much with all off season long, to maybe get a heads up, because you're going to come out of nowhere a little bit more, which is how you get the teams that were better than expected last year. Jackson, I feel like you would be 100% against any idea of Patrick Mahomes getting any worse, because he is so good. Do you think that there's any thought to that happening?
Yeah, I think that Mookie brings up a point that very few people want to bring up, which is that, there is a chance that Mahomes could fall off a cliff. I don't necessarily see that. I think that he is the most talented quarterback that's ever walked this earth. And I think that we saw that even in the Super Bowl. I mean, how many drop passes did we see? He had no offensive line. He was being completely dominated by the defense, and he was making throws that look like Madden glitches, where he's about to faceplant into the turf and somehow he throws it 50 yards and it bounces off his receiver's face mask in the end zone.
Unbelievable.
I mean, and he's like 24. So, and he's built for it too. Patrick Mahomes is the NFL version of Steph Curry in a lot of ways, in that he changes what you think is possible for someone from that range. And on top of that, they were both born into professional athlete families, where you've got somebody who not only has the talent to be one of the greatest to ever do it, but also knows what it means to be the face of a franchise, knows what it means to be in a professional locker room. I mean, these guys grew up surrounded, Patrick Mahomes' dad played in Major League Baseball. He was around professional athletes. He understands that. And that's the thing with quarterback that gets lost in a lot of these discussions, is you have to be the CEO of a franchise. You have to be able to understand and acclimate and adapt to the fact that every single thing you do is going to be dissected. And Patrick Mahomes is someone who's handled that with absolute aplomb. I mean, he laid statistically an absolute egg in the Super Bowl, but I don't think anyone looks at that and is like, oh my gosh, he got figured out. So if you put the over under, like, for me to take the under on career Lombardis for Patrick Mahomes, you'd have to set that number at least 3.5. I do think he's that good. I think Andy Reid is that good.
If you want to bet the over, I'll take that bet with you.
Sure. But that's the number where I start to think about it.
Yeah,
because
he's that
everything
good.
Shy of that, I mean, he is that good, and he's got a franchise that is building the right way. I mean, yeah, they lost by 22, but geez Louise, they had their season's worth of drops in that one game. And unfortunately, I got to jet out of here, but because I know we can do this for another.
We should all
another
jet,
hour or
I
two,
think.
but
yeah.
But I would say the main takeaway is Seattle has gone from being the presumptive favorite in the NFL to a contender, to a fringe contender, to now outside of that fringe looking in. And they really need to reestablish what their franchise philosophy is for the next 3 or 4 years if they're really going to try and maximize what they're capable of.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, we should all make like Adam Gaze and call it Jets and get out of here. Mookie Alexander, you write at fieldgulls.com, as does Jacson Bevens. Follow Mookie on Twitter at Mookie Alexander, Jacson at Jacson Bevens. Any final parting thoughts, Mookie?
Yeah, Damian Lillard is one of the most clutch players I've ever watched.
Oh my God. Oh my God. God damn, why you gotta pull that out right now? Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Oh my gosh. Yes. One that I wouldn't know anything about. So you guys set that up amongst yourselves. Jacson, any final words?
Nope. One thing that would make me feel a lot better, which used to annoy the shit out of me, but now I would just love to hear a "Go Hawks" from Russell Wilson.
Me and Russell Wilson won't say that right now. So thank you for anyone who watched this or listened to it. That's it for the show.
Hey,
bye.
Go
appreciate
Hawks.
y'all having me. Yeah, go Hawks.